Welcome to MATV studios, and program's name you must be knowing by now is Sathi Ke Sang Sang, and this program is multilingual. Really, sometimes we bring people here, bring guests here who speak in Gujarati, others speak in Urdu, Hindi, Punjabi, and English. Today we are going to speak in English because we got two beautiful ladies with me. One is a very well-known face. It is Seema Malhoitra. She was Member of Parliament. She will be Member of Parliament, I hope and I wish, in the next elections, which are going to be held on 7th of May. Before I go further, I want to remind you that the elections are on 7th of May, and I ask you to come out and vote. Use your democratic right, irrespective of which party, which person you are going to vote for. And the second guest I have is Elizabeth Hughes. And I was laughing, actually smiling, because Elizabeth as Queen, she said. And so it is easy to remember that it's Elizabeth Hughes.
Thank you.
Let me welcome you, two ladies. Elizabeth Hughes is, by the way, the councillor in Hounslow, and I'll tell you more about what she does and everything later on. Welcome to our studios, ladies.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Seema, I hope, not only hope, I know you're very, very busy. And how the campaign is going for tour?
Well, I think the campaign is going incredibly well, and as well as us working very hard in our own seats, we are all out trying to support the 106 seats that Labour needs to win. It's 106 steps to Downing Street for Ed Miliband, and I think everybody has been surprised at how well the campaign has gone for the Labour Party. It wasn't predicted it would be so. People underestimate Ed Miliband, but I think the debates really helped to get the campaign going. And now there's a spring in our step, really feeling optimistic.
He's gaining confidence, isn't it?
I think actually Ed's always had confidence, but when people see you as the leader of the opposition, that is different from being seen as the potential Prime Minister. But nobody really looked at David Cameron at the last election and saw him as the Prime Minister. So we do see people differently. But now it's a time when people are seeing that the choice between the Prime Minister is going to be between Ed Miliband or David Cameron.
That's
and it's really making an impact on his own ratings.
But when you look at the newspapers, perhaps you're right that maybe there are some prejudices, biased attitude towards one or the other, and we see that David Cameron is favoured more. Is it because, as you said rightly, perhaps is because he's the Prime Minister and people got a different perspective, he's in front of the television and the press and everything, he has made a good mark. Is that the reason, or do you think there are personality flaws?
Well, I think that is part of it, but what was also disappointing is the way David Cameron was about the debates, and people felt at the very start of the election campaign, and I talked to a lot of people, and I was involved in doing some of the discussion about the debates as well, that he looked like he was running scared. If you don't have a Prime Minister who wants to defend their record, then that isn't very democratic at the time of an election. So he didn't start the campaign well, and I think David Cameron has now been just trying to catch up. But Ed Miliband has been very clear. I think the Labour Party's got a really good campaign every day. There's clear focus, and we're not being distracted. I think that's the other good thing. We feel confident because we're not being distracted.
Okay, before I talk about other subjects, still Ed Miliband. Why in some Labour Party campaign leaflets, only 10%, according to various newspapers, only 10% prospective candidates, Labour candidates, used his picture or his profile on their literature? Why is that?
I don't know why, because I tell you, I've got a very big picture with Ed Miliband in mind. And, sometimes it can be the speed that you're doing your campaign literature. We all had to do our campaign literature much faster than we expected, sometimes in January, February as well. We had to do the drafts. So actually, I was very lucky I managed to get taken a very good picture with Ed. So there are all sorts of reasons, but you sometimes decide, people also like very local literature. So that's part of the story that you tell about the Labour Party in the community. So it's always a combination, but Ed's been all around the country, so many different seats. There's no hesitation to take a picture with him. No, just today there's YouTube video. There is no hesitation. And even they call it now Millie fandom. Have you heard this? Young people taking pictures with Ed Miliband is now the new trend.
That was the next question I was going to ask you actually. Ed Miliband was with Russell Brand.
Yes.
And some people said, oh, it must be a joke, you know, why he has gone to his place, you know, talk to him. When he is saying, Russell Brand is saying that we should not take part in this election process, which is a negativity in itself. Do you think it was wise of Ed Miliband to go there and talk to him?
Do you think it would have been wise for him to ignore him? And I would say that whenever there's a criticism, for Ed Miliband to have actually gone and spoken to Russell Brand and challenged him. I mean, you can't, when you're trying to promote, as you did yourself at the beginning of the interview, whatever your political leaning, exercise your democratic vote, come out and vote and change your world. And this is when you have somebody who is proactively trying to dissuade people and not supporting that democratic process. I think for Ed Miliband to actually go into the lion's den and beard him and challenge him was a very positive thing. I was pleased to see that.
Well, Russell Brand, to be fair to Ed Miliband to an extent, that guy is well known, but I only pointed out on the fact that he gave a negative impression about these elections. They are saying all the politicians, they are somehow not very good, they are dishonest and all that. And the conversation they two have, it was very light-hearted, I must admit, and surprisingly it was seen by a lot of people. So you think he has taken the right step going and seeing him?
I think it's better to go and see him than to ignore him. Just ignoring it won't make the opinion go away. And to actually enter into an open discussion is a positive thing. I think it's a positive step. I'm being a little mild on how I respond to that, but I'm very pleased that the opinion of Russell Brand and people who would promote non-participation in elections and in voting, and not all politicians are the same, and it's very unfair to say that we are grouped together as a type that is dishonest, etc., etc. That may be some people's perception, but it's not the reality.
Do you think some people will be persuaded by this kind of, some people call it gimmick, so if I can use that word, with this kind of gimmick, do you think they will be persuaded to vote in the elections because of this?
I would hope that they maybe would look at, if they had decided they didn't wish to participate, that they might reconsider their position. That's the, you can't make people vote. No. It is a democratic country after all.
Sure. Well, sure.
I think we also have to send a message that if you think about what the implications are, if everybody does not vote, where does that leave us? And Russell Brand should also be asking the question, who is it who is voting and why? Because you can be guaranteed that those who are part of the establishment, those who have something that they want to keep for themselves, there's a lot more voting that happens by default within the Conservative Party. Turnout has often been higher amongst Conservative support. So it's often those who have sometimes the most to gain from voting who feel the most disempowered. And this is just encouraging them to have less power, because in the end, the result is going to be even more those who decided to vote.
Because if you don't go and vote, that means you cannot complain.
Quite.
That the Labour Party hasn't done what you wanted them to do, and the same way the other parties, you got to go and exercise your right to vote. Surprisingly, in India, sorry, I'm bringing India in there. A lot of people go and vote. No, in some areas, even 90% people went out and voted.
I mean, do you remember the first democratic South African elections? Yes. Those queues of people. Yes. It was amazing to actually see that. It's a privilege.
It's a big privilege, and you don't get this easily. So anyway, as I said in my beginning of the program, I always ask my viewers to go out and vote and use your democratic right. Okay, let's move on to which is very talked about topic. A, economy. Number 2 is NHS. Number 3 is immigration. It may not be in that order, but these three things are being talked about. When we talk about immigration, we are living in an area in Slough and Southall and Hounslow, all these areas, we got sizable number of immigrants from all walks of life, from most of the countries. You were mentioning when we were sitting there, the 156 languages spoken?
Approximately in Hounslow, in the London Borough of Hounslow, yeah.
So when we talk about this immigration, I think there was a time when people used to talk about immigration from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, African countries and things like that. But now people are talking about, if you could call it immigration, although they are using their right to be members of EEC, these numbers are coming from EEC countries, mainly from Baltic nations, old Soviet Union nations, because those countries, their per capita income is 5 times, in some cases even 10 times lower than us. When Labour Party is saying that we want to stay members of EEC, obviously the party is prepared to accept that we are going to have X number of people coming to this country regularly. Am I right in that?
Well, it recognises there's going to be flows of immigration, because also what we see is a lot of people who are British who have gone to live in other countries and have done so with the flexibility that the arrangements have allowed across Europe. If you're talking about the expansion and then the increased immigration from Eastern Europe, the numbers were higher than were expected that came to Britain. And there is reaction to that, and all the parties have had to address that in terms of what the impact is when something like that happened that was unexpected. But there are a range of issues that have contributed that we believe absolutely needs addressing, and that you do have to reform some aspects of how Europe works in order that it's a fairer system. And that's where the Labour Party's talked about having more controls, making sure that we tighten up some of the employer practices and how recruitment is happening, and also tighten up on benefits and access to benefits for those who are coming.
The Labour Party is saying that we will not give them the benefit for 2 years. And when we talk about...
And that you have to contribute, you also have to make a contribution.
Yes, sure. But when you are saying that we got to restrict them coming here, you cannot do it unless the other countries agree.
Well, we are saying
because there is a freedom of movement.
That's true, there's freedom of movement, but people should be able to come if they've got a job. There should be ways in which you can focus immigration as well on higher skill areas or where there are skill shortages. That's where immigration has made the biggest contribution as well, because we won't have an economy like Britain's growing without having some of that workforce that will make that contribution. So it's not always about numbers. The other thing that's important is about making sure that the economies are growing in Eastern Europe. There's more opportunities there for people to be able to have their work.
So do you, when you will be in government, if you come into the government, do you think you will be able to negotiate with Brussels for this kind of restricted movement within within the EU?
Well, the issue again is about how you have more controls over what you have. And in terms of negotiation, I do think we're a much stronger player because we have partners in Europe, we participate in Europe, we believe in Europe, rather than David Cameron, who left himself really isolated. But the other point is that the Labour Party has said we should have controls. We shouldn't have cut the border staff, as Theresa May did. We should be able to know who's coming in. We should be able to fund that through having a visa waiver system like America. And we should be able to have more ways in which we're flexible on the immigration system, so you can focus it on incentivising those where there are skills shortages.
Okay, I got a break now, and we will carry on talking about this issue and the other issue. We still can talk about the numbers because people are talking about the number. That's why I'm bringing this up. So, दोस्तों, we got Elizabeth Hughes, who is a councillor in Hounslow, and you were elected in 2010.
No, 2005.
2005.
First time, yes.
2000.
Long time.
You attended Manchester Polytechnic 1983-86. So you are really Manchester girl.
No, really a Crampford girl.
Now you are. Okay.
I can take the girl out to Crampford.
When did you come to Crampford? Was that 60?
I was 66. I was 2 years old.
You came in 1960. Oh, that's a long time.
I was born in Fulham in London, and then my parents.
Okay,
there,
we are going for a break, and we got Seema, Malhoitra, and back. We got two guests here. Seema Malhoitra, who was Member of Parliament, sitting Member of Parliament. And on 7th of May, I very much hope and wish, and I'm sure she will become Member of Parliament again. And then we got Elizabeth Hughes, who became Councillor, Hounslow Councillor in 2005. And I was just checking your biodata. It's very interesting actually. You came from Ireland as an immigrant, Southern Ireland?
My mother is an immigrant,
Yeah.
and she came here in 1955 at the age of 15. And it was when a ticket would be sent, and send a daughter, we have a job, and lived in, like so many immigrants, and she lived in Kilburn in a room with mattresses where the girls who worked at night slept during the day, and the girls who worked
just
in the
like
day,
us.
exactly the same, exactly the same. She came over from a very, very, very poor background, and started working in kitchens, chambermaiding, etc., and then met my father and.
But
became a nurse,
immigrants
etc.
are known for hard work, isn't it? Your parents, I myself, and my so many friends. When I came in 1962, there were people living here from Indian subcontinent who were not very much educated, but they worked very hard.
Yeah, worked day and night.
Day and night. There should be 16 to 18 people living in one house alone because the local people, they wouldn't give them the room.
I won't repeat it, but how it was.
Yeah.
But also my mother, I think it's important to say as well, I think the first 3 years she lived in digs with a lot of other Irish young women with a landlady, and 80% of her wages were sent home every week, and that supported her family in the 1950s, of which there is recognition now by the Irish government, and almost gave up a life to come and support her very, very struggling, very poor family.
I think it's commendable.
And I think it's a story of a lot of immigrants, I think,
Yeah,
even now. Yeah.
That's absolutely, yes, even now, yes. And you attended Manchester Polytechnic from 1983 to 86, and you graduated in English Studies BA Honours. And you became member of Labour Party not very long ago, it's 1994, comparing to mine of 1967.
I know.
I don't know when Seema became member of Labour Party.
I was always political.
1992.
Yeah, I was always political, but I was always very left-wing, and then came into the Labour Party movement through the trade union. I was with the construction UCAP.
So basically you have lived in this area for a number of years now.
Most of my life, yes.
Most of your life. And when we talk about Heathrow Airport, I was talking to another guest of mine last week about Heathrow Airport. People are concerned about Heathrow Airport on two issues. That some councillors in Hounslow, in other areas, they are opposing third runway. The reason being the noise pollution, which is understandable. But then we also think about the job creation. What I studied is 75,000 jobs will be created. Are you in favour of third runway?
It's a difficult question to ask me because I'm actually, as a councillor, we have a policy. And at the moment, our policy is not bigger, but better at Heathrow Airport. And I think we're all waiting until after the election when we have the final reports out that will give recommendations. I don't think, although I'm very pleased that locally we have a voice and we have opinions, we must all be, I think, very much aware that Heathrow Airport is central to the economy of the whole region. And my husband works at Heathrow Airport, and my mother at one period worked at Heathrow Airport. I think everybody who lives in this area has either worked directly there or has a job linked to it. My current company, is where it is because of Heathrow Airport. My husband's job depends on Heathrow Airport. And I think it's a bit of a period of uncertainty now, but I sincerely hope that after the election we will get a definitive direction from central government and then we take it from there. I can't really be more open than that. I think that's the realistic, pragmatic approach at the moment to
But
Heathrow
as you
Airport.
put it rightly, that in this area, Heathrow is a hub of economy, and virtually in every family somebody is working or has worked at Heathrow Airport. I have worked at Heathrow Airport. I was a capacity control officer with British Airways.
Gosh, a very important position.
Even we had this post office there. Remember, on 3 terminals, I think they are still there. I think 3 branches were there already. I worked there as well. So we are connected one way or the other with Heathrow Airport. The argument which is given by the people who favor the third runway is that until and unless we have third runway, the flights will be diverted to Schiphol Airport, they will be diverted to Frankfurt and other places rather than coming to London. I remember my relatives, when they come from America or Canada, they used to have a stopover at Heathrow, but now they go via other places, because that adds to economy if those flights are landed in this country.
I think you touched earlier on our membership of the European Union, and one thing I'd very much like to see the EU and our MEPs do for us here is actually get us on a level playing field with other airports in Europe, such as Schiphol. Now, its location means it can run the night flights, the larger capacity cargo aircraft, etc., etc. And I think until you have that level playing field to say for example, no night flights in Europe between, say, 1 a.m. and 6 a.m. Until you have that sort of equality of approach, I don't think you actually have we have a fair run of it here with Heathrow. But as I say, everything is, excuse the pun, but up in the air at the moment. And I really want to see some direction from central government with facts behind it before we do anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was looking at your biodata, you hold numerous positions in council. That includes licensing and planning.
Yes, yes.
When we talk about planning, there is another issue as well, apart from this third runway, is these beds in sheds, so to speak. They are in Southall, they are in Slough, they are in Hounslow. What kind of solution do you think there could be there?
There are two reasons why people are living in back gardens. One is a scarcity of affordable housing, period. That's a fact. And people will rather take the risk and live in an illegal erection for £700 a month because they can't afford £1,200 a month rent.
Right.
So that's number one. The second point is where we've seen buildings in back gardens that were used as play sheds, storage, etc., etc. Where now that house isn't a house where a family lives, it's been sold on. We have unscrupulous landlords and they are letting them out without any concern at all for the well-being and the safety, personal safety.
Yes, because it is not safe there,
and
is it?
our worry always is, and I think Seema shares this and all other councillors do, that one day we're going to have a horrific fire or deaths of a young family where there's a gas bottle gone off at the back of one of these properties and the fire brigade can't get in.
So what kind of steps the council is taking?
We have quite a clever way of approaching it at the moment. What we're doing is quite a systematic grid approach. We can use aerial photographs in specific periods of time and actually map the area, and you're moving. You have to have evidence before you can actually legislate, before you can actually take action under planning regulations and law against somebody who's doing this. But it ruins the environment for all of us. It creates overcrowding. It's a dangerous practice, and it's very, very, I can't tell you how exploitative it is. And it's horrible. When you meet some of the people who are involved in this are criminals. You're from people who are just making a few quid, letting their back garden, building out, to people who are actually doing this on a very great basis. I don't like it. I don't agree with it. Period.
Let's move
There are some areas where it's done well. It's done with, or where there are extensions that are meeting family need, and it's done where people apply
different.
through planning permission.
That's a different
I think it's different. But
I mean, you wouldn't like your children to sleep in the shed,
no, but it's different. But for example, I met somebody yesterday who was talking about how with the family, with some of the needs that they have, that they use an extra room effectively for.
No, that is a different.
That's allowed as well.
But it is. But so I think part of it is about people not having planning permission and applying through. That's exactly and that is,
yeah.
That's the thing. You shouldn't be doing it without planning.
Okay, let's talk about a wider issue. I was reading this report about unemployment figure fell to its lowest number since 2008, and it has dropped to 1.84 million.
Well, you've got to look at other indicators too. You've obviously studied.
Despite,
you've been in economics as well, and so you have to look at other indicators. So, what's people's incomes? How are they managing their household budgets? What are the stresses and strains? And in our constituency, Liz is the chair of the constituency Labour Party as well. In our constituency, we had over 800 families who called the National Debt Helpline last year. That's one of the highest figures in the country. And you have to say...
This figure is wrong when it says that 31.05 million people are in work. It's higher
But
than
there's a difference.
ever,
If you
and
you've
the
got to look at-
unemployment
yes,
has fallen.
But you have to look at this. So look at 0 hours contracts as well.
Exactly.
If you saying that people are in a contract. So I met somebody yesterday when I was at the school gate for the election campaign, talking about how her partner is on a 0 hours contract. He doesn't know one day from the next what work he's going to get. They don't know what income they're going to have. And because they're on a 0 hours contract, it's not considered a contract for other purposes. So they don't have the normal benefits that will come from being in work. So there is something that the Labour Party's talked about very vocally in Parliament, which is you can't just have these figures and pretend that there is then, everything is perfect behind them. If you've actually seen people whose debts are rising, the rise in food banks to over 1 million people using them now from 60,000 4 years ago, something's going wrong. And you have to look behind those headline indicators to the real picture.
Okay, the break has come back again actually. Dosto, we are talking to Seema Malhoitra, Labour parliamentary Labour candidate from Hounslow, and then we are also talking to Councillor Elizabeth Hughes. And small break. Thank you very much for viewing this program. It is very important because the elections are going to be held virtually next week. We are talking to Seema Malhoitra, who is the Labour candidate from the constituency of Hounslow and Feltham. And she was elected first in December 2011, and then she is the shadow minister for preventing violence against women and girls. That is a very important issue actually. I will talk to you about this in a minute. And you are also founder and president of the Fabian Women's Association Network. And it is a 10th anniversary now. My viewers would like to know, what is that actually, Fabian?
Fabian Women's Network. So the Fabian Society has been around since even before the Labour Party, and many distinguished figures even in Indian history, Jawaharlal Nehru, were involved with the Fabian Society. There was a strong tradition of thinking about progressive policy, how government should be, when countries gained independence, how they should be run and administered. So the Fabian had that strong tradition, and I founded the Fabian Women's Network. So it's a network of women within the Fabian Society who debate and propose policy ideas. We have a network, we run a political education program as well.
Interests.
Not in favour of women's interests, but often there's a women's perspective. So on economic policy, there could be a women's perspective. On transport policy, a women's perspective. On education policy, a women's perspective. So pensions, an example, because where there are issues that may impact women differently, or there are particular gender inequalities, then you need an evidence base to how you respond. So that's been what it's about.
Because you were shadow ministers, minister for preventing violence against women and girls. That's a very sensitive topic, and we know when you read the newspapers and everything, how endemic it is in our society.
It's very endemic, and as I've still been through the election campaign, the Shadow Minister for Preventing Violence Against Women and Girls, when we've had data that's come out as well about rise in sexual offences reporting, domestic violence. We've seen domestic violence reporting on the increase in our own local community. And as well as that, we know that it's an issue in Asian communities a lot, and it's only become more recently, I would say maybe in the last 10, 20 years, the ability to talk about it, not even across the board. I had one woman from my constituency who said to me, I'm wanting to talk to you, but I haven't been able to say what's been happening to me for 30 years because I'm worried about the shame in the community. Now, we are stronger than that. We're stronger than that. And we know that there is no cultural excuse for violence against women and girls, and that we all want to see people being safe in their own homes. But we know also 750,000 children in this country at least experience domestic violence growing up, seeing their parents fighting. And that's something we have to change through better education, through more awareness, through better response in the justice system.
Better legislation also?
we have to tighten up legislation as well, but it's also about social attitudes. So today, when we had the Labour Party's pink bus come to Hounslow, that's the pink bus with Yvette Cooper, who was there as well, and we went and we were with Ruth Cadbury also today, and we had a discussion with young people in Brentford, and I've done a range of discussions around the country. And this issue of attitudes, social attitudes, how we can make sure there isn't a negative portrayal of women in the media, how we can actually have a sense that there should be that self-esteem and that respect for both genders. That has to start at a very young age of making sure those attitudes are taught and understood, respect, healthy relationships.
That's good. That's good. Talking about the NHS, which is at the very heart of the people, irrespective of whether they're immigrants or indigenous population, it's a serious issue. In Southall and Ealing, we got the issue of this Ealing hospital, and I would like to know what kind of problems Hounslow area is facing in that respect.
Well, there's one issue that I will highlight, which is there's a range of issues actually, but one I'll particularly highlight, and we did a survey on this in Heston, is access to GP services. It used to be that there was more targets around this, and the Conservatives took away the targets for 48-hour GP appointments. Now you can be waiting easily 2-3 weeks for an appointment, and I get that regularly on the doorstep. Every day it will come up, and people lose confidence in politics and politicians. The other thing that the Conservatives took away is they took away the maximum ratio of patients to one GP. So when people complain, actually there's more people coming and that's impacting our services. On this issue, it's the way that the government has reorganised the health service that has caused a lot of the problem. So if you've got more people registering in one GP and you've got 3,000 and not 2,500 as an example, then that's going to make it longer to get a service.
Because it is noble of the Labour Party that they are saying that we will guarantee 48 hours appointment.
But we had
and
them
on
before.
the other hand, the Conservatives are saying that the surgeries will be open from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. Now, in both these cases, you need the resources, you need the infrastructure. The resources, I mean from resources, is that you are saying that you will employ 8,000 more doctors, 20,000 more nurses, and 3,000 care workers.
Yeah, 5,000 care workers. Yeah.
3 or 5, I think it's 3,000.
3,000 midwives as well.
About 3,000, say 3,000. And the Conservative Party is saying we will employ 5,000 more doctors and so on. So all these things, you cannot train a doctor overnight. You got to wait for a few years actually before you have the homegrown doctors, so to speak.
But the Conservatives also cut nurse training places. So they actually reduced the number that were coming through.
Okay, I'm saying, so far as both the parties are concerned, you got to have some way of bringing those doctors into the country. Either you import those doctors from India and other places, or you train your own. For training, as I said before, it takes a long time to train a doctor, and then maybe that trained doctor, he will find America or Canada more attractive.
But you also know that people have left the health service because they've been so unhappy with the changes. Morale has been so low. So there's also an opportunity to be able to encourage people to come back into the health service. What we have seen is when the Conservatives cut those nurse training places, cut the number of nurses, then there was a crisis. Even in our own local hospital, West Middlesex, they've had to recruit agency nurses from abroad because they've had to do something in emergency. Then it costs the country much more. That isn't something we should be accepting.
So basically you're saying that by more efficiency, we can have more doctors. Because last time I was interviewing Ruth, and she was saying, I think she's right there, she says we got to import some doctors because you cannot train people overnight, as I said before, and you got to create an environment where a doctor feels comfortable to carry on doing the job. Because what is happening at the moment is some doctors, they're getting early retirement, and some doctors go abroad, for example Australia or America and Canada. Perhaps they find more attractive and less stressful atmosphere there, I don't know.
Well, I think there has been that issue. So I talked about morale in the health service and why people are leaving. So if you do make it a nicer place to work, more supportive, more attractive, then there are those who have left who would come back. I know people who have left who would come back if it was a better place to work. And what we've said in the Labour Party is we need an NHS that has the time to care, because we all have ourselves and our families, or I think about my relatives as well. When you are looking at balancing the care between the hospital and at home or in the community, you need to have that health system joined up, especially also for older people. If you don't have the time to care, to pay that attention, then conditions go undiagnosed and we see the stress that causes the whole family. So there's much more to do. If we want to keep the NHS, that's the choice the country has to make.
Do you think there should be more injection of money into the system?
We've committed to that.
Because Conservatives, they are saying £8 billion they will put in.
Uncosted. Uncosted.
Well, that's a different matter.
And then they're going to
the Labour Party is saying 2.5 billion.
And it's costed for what we've said we provide for that. And absolutely in terms of where we would get it from. Now, you have to be very careful at election time with what parties say in order to get elected, and then what they're going to do afterwards. Now, take, for example, inheritance tax. 3 times the Conservatives have promised, but the last raise in the inheritance tax threshold was the Labour Party. And we've said that we would keep that under review in every budget. The Conservatives have now promised it 3 times and never made a change. So on the NHS...
They are putting the figure of 1 million.
They did it before the last election. You remember that, and they did nothing.
So you think they will not keep the promise this time?
I can't see them keeping many of their promises. So, and you will see as well that they, you know, when they made the promise about the 8 billion, they couldn't say where it was coming from. I listened carefully to Jeremy Hunt, and he said, we think it will come from the proceeds of future economic growth. Look at today's figures challenging the economy, and Liz and I were talking about this earlier. You know, you can't make assumptions. You have to have a plan in government, and that's why the Labour Party, I think, is far more honest with the public about what we can afford now and how we would make a difference.
So basically you are saying that as they are saying, we will inject not actually 8 billion, 12 billion pound. No, sorry, this is
8 billion.
8 billion. Yeah, about 12 billion figure I was talking about was the foreign aid. Some people do talk about it. They're saying that when we need the money at home, why should we be paying so much money to foreign countries, especially those rulers who are not keeping with the democratic system and their autocratic regimes? Do you think it is right to have enshrined that kind of law, so that kind of aid into the law?
Well, it is ring-fenced money.
It is ring-fenced, but the Conservative Party is saying it should be enshrined into the law.
We've voted for that. And the Conservatives for 0.7% of GDP to be. And
should it be enshrined into the law?
I think so,
I think
because I mean this is for better or for worse. We're in our country. I think is one of the best countries in the world to live in, and despite everything that we've mentioned before, things that aren't so good, that don't work so well, there's an awful lot of things that do. And one of the things for me is quite a British ideal of fair play, of education, of women's rights, of children's rights, of decent standards of living. And if we're promoting that through foreign aid, it's because the idea is not just to use it as a propaganda, but actually to educate people. You touched on bringing doctors from abroad to come and work in the NHS. Why would they come here if there's no link with this country, if they don't feel a cultural bond there, and a sharing of aspiration, a sharing of ideals? And those are the things that really get people going, that really, really give them those aspirations. And for my money, I think it's well spent. I don't have a problem with my tax money going overseas.
Basically, this 12 billion pound, it should stay ring-fenced.
I think so.
It should be enshrined into the law. If tomorrow, God forbid, if the economy of this country goes down.
But then it goes down in proportion, doesn't it?
The 12 billion will go down as a percentage of GDP.
No, what they are saying is it will be enshrined into the law, it will be guaranteed.
Yes, but as a percentage. So if the economy shrinks,
it
then actually
will come down
the amount comes relative.
But
yeah.
at this present time, do you think it is the right step? And
When you look at the difference,
we should carry on giving the aid to the.
When you look at the difference it's absolutely making. So if you look at the impact on children's education, on water sanitation, on building infrastructure, on women's empowerment, you know, that's much less of it. If you look at now the crisis, for example, just take the devastation in Nepal at the moment, how much is going there, and we have a large Gurkha Nepalese community as well in Hounslow who are really rallying round.
Do you think
yesterday I was at Heathrow
last night 12 doctors went, wasn't it?
And I went to Heathrow to see them.
It is terrible. But do you think that aid which we are giving, it's just for the simplification of it, do you think that money we are giving, for example, to Nepal now will come out of this 12 billion pound?
It's a slightly different issue. I mean, this is disaster relief money, and a lot of it is now matched funding with private donations. But there is a point which is when a country has the right infrastructure, not always the case, but you can withstand shocks more. So you need to build some of that support within countries, and that's what aid is about: sustainability. It's about leaving a country able to more and better stand on its own 2 feet. That's how the conversation around aid has changed. That's part of our responsibility as developed nations as well.
Yes.
After the war, we also needed help to rebuild. That's how the world works.
How do you see the economy of this country? Let's move on to economy, because I was reading the report today. It was compiled by during the last Labour government, the real term increase in income tax and national insurance was £1,895 when the Labour government was in power. Do you think you will do better than that, or what?
Well, we've actually said that we would actually have a much fairer way of being in the economy, and the Tories aren't telling you that the effect of their policies has been...
It's a Commons analysis.
Yeah, but the Tories aren't telling us. If you talk about where the economy is as well right now, because when times are better, you know, then and when people can afford it, sometimes you do have to pay more. But the point is, over the last 5 years, we've seen household incomes drop by an average of £1,600, and how they're phoning the national debt helplines, how people are using food banks, how we have people who are, you know, struggling in so many different ways. You've got to say, why are the Tories doing this?
I've got to stop you, I'm sorry. My best wishes are with you, Seema, and I'm sure you're going to win. And thank you very much,
a pleasure,
Elizabeth,
absolute
coming
pleasure.
here. It was a pleasure to talk to you. I'm sorry the time wasn't that much.
Gosh,
was it?
it's gone so quickly.
You were saying, can we have just half an hour? Even this was not enough. Anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you.
And that was our program today, and the elections are going to be on 7th of May. As I said before, as Seema has said, Elizabeth has said, please come out of your houses on 7th of May and use your democratic right. And I'll see you next week. Thank you very much. Good night.